Vader one time they were going to the military was going to ship him out of Kuwait. That when they had a huge crate, they were going to sneak him out of Kuwait in. True story. It went to Briscoe, but we know when Vader slapped the reporter around, and the military came to Briscoe and said, "Hey, we got a way to sneak him out of the country. We've done this before." And Briscoe called Vince, and Vince's like, "Are you planning on doing that?" And Jerry goes, "No." Vince goes, "God, thank God. Oh, my God." Yeah, they had like a crate, I don't know, it was maybe from Barnum's and Bailey Circus or something, but they had a crate, and they were going to sneak him out of the country, get him to Paris, and then let him loose and let him run around.
Can you imagine the visual of what you just said? Like, that sounds like a cartoon. I mean,
that's true story. 100% true. The military offered to sneak Vader out of Kuwait.
I just realized I just watched Trading Places with Eddie Murphy recently. That's an underrated Christmas movie, by the way.
Wonderful movie.
If they'd have put him in the ape costume, that is a Trading Places storyline.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Gosh. Well, we've got a big story for us today because this is the most unusual something to wrestle maybe we've ever done, in that we're talking about private conversations between Vince McMahon and John Layfield. Something that was never really able to be disclosed in the Torch or the Observer or any other sort of research material, because there's only one person on earth who can debunk what we're about to run through, and he ain't talking. So we put it on a poll, and everybody wants to hear what Vince McMahon was saying in your ear when you were doing commentary all those years. And this has been something that we've heard about from other people. Certainly guys, like Mick Foley have come out and said that, man, that was just not for him. And he's legendary for the way he would handle his commentators and the things that we would hear he's saying, but we never heard it. But this is actually the first time that you and I have done a show where we didn't sort of dictate the schedule to you. And we said, hey, next week, here's what we're thinking. You said, hey, what if, because I've never told these stories, what if we talked about Vince being in my ear on commentary? So when you were excited to talk about it, I was excited to talk about it. What do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about Vince McMahon producing commentary?
Oh, there's a million things. Look, Michael Cole and I were on the headset with Vince and Kevin Dunn, and a lot of other people were on headsets, but Vince a lot of times would talk to us during the show. Sometimes he'd talk to us about the show. Sometimes he'd talk to just me about the show, because he had no one to talk to back there because he's got his headphones on. So he's not really got a chance to talk to somebody. So he would talk to us. And so we got insight into Vince for years that nobody had insight into. I mean, we heard the stuff that went on all throughout the backstage area that literally nobody else heard. Now, there's other guys who had better access and things like that, but we heard all the stuff directly from Vince. And the big misnomer is that Vince dictated everything. 100% not true. Vince was the best producer I've ever worked with. He would give you very succinct phrases, and sometimes I'd be one word behind him because I trusted him so much, and he would lead us to a place. And a lot of times Vince wouldn't give out. We'll go through this later. Vince used to give us notes directly to me and Michael Cole, which is cool because he opened everything up. He would tell us about creative going forward because he knew he could trust us. In the creative meetings, which was the production meetings they call, but they're also a mix of creative, Vince wouldn't do that because there were always stooges in the production meetings. So Vince wouldn't open up everything. So when Vince would give you commentary a lot of times, sometimes he'd say stuff, and I know this is not going to be a shock, that made no sense whatsoever, but it would make sense a week later. People get him all kinds of credit for not making sense on some stuff. Vince nearly always had a plan, and sometimes he'd tell you something. I would just say it. For one, it's his sandbox. It's his company. We're not real commentators, by the way. Michael Cole used to always say, if I get in the Hall of Fame, which Michael Cole will one day, yes, he said, I'm going to get up there and say, I'm a fake wrestler called a fake sport with a fake name. Thank you. And that's it. We're not real commentators. So when Vince would say something, I would just repeat it. A lot of times it'd play out a week later sometimes because Vince knew what was coming forward. It was pretty cool when you'd say something that was disconnected and, something's coming up that's pretty cool.
I appreciate hearing, because I wouldn't have imagined that you guys would have been privy to all of the future plans and creative and things like that. But I guess when it gets to that sort of inner circle like that, it's possible. I wanted to ask you, I think the first time I remember seeing you do commentary is in the 90s. There were various Raw episodes, and you joined JR and the King. Is that really your first taste of doing this, or had you done this in another life somewhere else?
No, I done it down in Texas. There's some old pictures of me and Doyle. Oh my goodness, he's a good friend, big tall guy. I'm gonna hate. He sees this show, he's gonna hate me for it. They used to do commentary, really good, talented guy, and I did some back in Texas for them. You know, in Japan and in Europe, they didn't have any. Of course, I didn't speak the language in Mexico when I was down there, so I didn't do much there. So this is my first really big taste of it. But we cut a million freaking promos down in Texas. You know, we used to do they bicycle essentially the tape where you'd cut a promo for, okay, you got the Von Erichs Friday night at Will Rogers cage match, go to give us 2 minutes. Okay, you got Killer Tim Brooks and Waxahachie and a lumberjack match, give me a minute and a half, go. You know, so you'd sit there and just do promo after promo without any prep for it except for time, who you had, and what the match was. So I was used to talking, but not doing a commentary that much. So this is my first time really to do something, especially on a big stage like that.
So I also wanted to ask, you know, with regards to making the call, for you being the guy out there on the headsets back in the 90s, is that Vince McMahon messing with Vince Russo, perhaps? I'm not bringing that up to be funny. I know that there's a certain contingent of Russo fans who are upset with you and I right now because we maybe weren't so polite in your discussion about the Brawl for All. But we heard during that episode that he being Russo, pronouns pal, was not really a fan of your voice. He thought you were too Southern, or you needed to speak less Southern, or whatever. So when you get these opportunities, is Russo still there in that era, as best you recall, or is that Vince messing with Vince?
I don't remember. I don't remember if Russo was there for that or not. I you know, just the times all mixed together, you know, being almost 30 years ago. I don't remember. I do know that was McMahon that wanted that, because Vince liked me when I came in. You know, he didn't know me. And so that's a big difference. That's not something like they went out to get me. They did not go out to get me. I showed up on the doorstep and they thought, oh my God, we might need to sign this guy, because if not, he's probably going down to WCW, which looked like to be the case. So all of a sudden they're stuck with me, and they don't really know what they have. You know, Vince, when I first met him in Titan Towers with J.J. Dillon and Lisa Wolf, told me that. He goes, I have no idea anything about you. He goes, tell me about you. The first Vince had met me, knew about me, probably had even heard of me. So Vince was trying to find things for me to do, and he had no idea what I could do, what I couldn't do. And I do know this commentary came from Vince McMahon.
I wanted to ask you about his philosophy, talking about Vince McMahon, his philosophy on commentary. You mentioned a minute ago that Michael Cole's going to say, hey, I was a fake commentator. But, you know, the rule that you see a lot of times in sports feels like it would be different in wrestling. A lot of times in baseball, basketball, football, you're trying to predict what's going to happen and sort of explain why it might happen and what the strategy is. But I imagine in pro wrestling, that's not the way you do it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And people have a hard time doing that. Commentators, you know, great commentators, play-by-play guys that come in have a hard time transitioning from sports to wrestling, because you're a step behind instead of a step ahead. So like in football, when you're sitting there and you've got a play coming up, and the play-by-play guy or the color commentator will say, look, the cornerback has rolled up on the wide receivers, going man-to-man coverage. Look at the MAC linebacker on the strong side, on the same side. He's inching up. Because you got a guy in man coverage on the wide receiver, that frees up that linebacker to blitz. He's probably coming. That's huge to a fan, because when a fan sees that, they're sitting there with their family or sitting there, all of a sudden they're in the game. They're going, oh, I see that now. The cornerback's manned up. That frees up the linebacker to blitz on that side. He's inching forward. It's going to be cool. He might get the quarterback. And it really enhances the game by giving away what could happen or being a step ahead. In wrestling, it kills it. If you say, oh, there's somebody behind that pillar, I wonder if it's the Undertaker. You just ruined 6 weeks of surprise. Right. So you have to be a step behind. And because of that, you appear dumb at times. And if people look at it, go, you know that's the Undertaker. You can see it's the Undertaker. But you say, who is that? Yeah. Because you want the fan to realize who it is and let them come to that association.